It's time for Past Access, a barrier-free tour through history. Now, here's your host, Pete Coleman.
The United States of America has been called a lot of things in her short time on the world stage. This republic endured many fits and seizures, innovations and triumphs. Through it all, the American experience has been a unique one. From her creation during the Age of Enlightenment leading to the American Revolution, and through her defining crucible of a bloody Civil War, these United States came together with the aspiration to be a bastion of hope and freedom. Even if those lofty goals fall short at times, this ever-changing and dynamic society never fails to impress her visitors. Our Past Access visit to the States takes us to the Mid-Atlantic region and the nation's capital of Washington, D.C., as well as the charmed city of Baltimore. It's a homecoming for me, and I'm glad you're along for the ride, as we examine the history that defines the American people and continues to inspire generations to come.
Hello and welcome to Past Access. I'm your host, Pete Coleman. Welcome to the United States of America. What a great place to start here at the home of George Washington, the first president of the United States, general of the Continental Army during the American Revolution, and one of the places that I remember well as a kid. I actually grew up here in the Washington DC area, so this was one of the many places for field trips I was growing up, and to see that it's come along quite well over the years is nice. So as we're here in the nation's capital, this is one of the many stops we'll take here on Past Access. We'll take a tour of this mansion. George was an interesting guy in the sense that there was a lot of mythology pitted around George, especially towards the latter part of the 19th century to kind of bolster his fame. He really didn't need it. He was a man of mark to his own regards, and I think that we'll kind of explore that here during this tour of Mount Vernon. Later we'll take a walk through the District of Columbia and some of the areas along the mall where the Smithsonian is located, and up the East Coast a little bit towards Baltimore, introducing you to at least part of the United States here on Past Access.
The estate of George Washington is virtually unchanged since he called Mount Vernon his home, all except the multi-million-dollar creation of the Mount Vernon Museum. The Welcome Center provides the visitor with what the estate has to offer, the history of the home, and the background of George Washington, the man, the myth, and the legend. An introductory film shows the powerful influence Washington had on the men he led and the country he helped create. There is so much more to the man that was written in the history books, and there is a perfect place to start that journey as we push towards the focal point of the estate, the mansion. Mount Vernon is one of the most visited tourist attractions in the United States. Not too bad for a once modest Virginia plantation. Over 1 million guests visit Mount Vernon each year. And you might feel that you are standing in the line with the majority of those million visitors during the always busy summer months travel season. No, seriously, the line is super long and the heat does not help. So a word of advice? Try to do the tour the first thing in the morning. It is not uncommon to have an historic reenactor stop on by to discuss the Washington family while you queue up. A little slice of history while you wait.
I'm very proud to be the lady wife of Colonel George Washington, but I have a great many responsibilities to make sure our home runs as smoothly as possible.
The mansion's first floor is wheelchair accessible with only a few wooden lifts to get over through the doorways. Inside, you will see the area that the Washingtons would entertain their guests among brightly painted walls, a fashion staple of the time. One of my favorite displays is that of a key of the Bastille, given to Washington by his protege, the Marquis de Lafayette. It was a symbol of freedom from oppression during the French Revolution, and a cherished artifact by Washington himself. Mr. Washington spent much of his time on the porch overlooking the Potomac River. You will have plenty of time to do the same as you enter his study. As for me, I'm ready to explore the grounds, and the summer garden is very much barrier-free. The attention to what Washington grew on the plantation is historically accurate, including his love of a well-kept garden. Yet this beauty and functionality of the plantation was built and maintained by an institution that is difficult to justify today. Part of the slave quarters occupied these grounds, and the story of the slave laborers are on display to help tell a much fuller story.
Okay, so we're inside the slave quarters here. This is also an important part of the discussion, not only for George Washington and his estate and our founding fathers, but also for the American experience. Slavery was one of the things that helped actually build this country from what it was in the colonial days to where it is today. And unfortunately, that cancer, like many people called it, even during the time that it was in existence, had to be resolved by the American Civil War several generations later. When you come into Mount Vernon, this is on the side of the house, and you can see that this is the residential area where they would stay, they would cook, and then they would go out and they would basically toil. And this is their existence. So it is part of the process, and we do have to mention that here on Past Access.
So who really was this man Washington? Inside the Museum and Education Center, you will follow his exploits as a young surveyor, the turbulent times in which he lived, and the war that would shape him. Yet it was the effort to uncover the person that fascinates me the most. Here, through forensic technology, we can see the true image of Washington taking shape. Through using his death mask, paintings, and other biometrics, we can see a figure come to life. From his youth to the days of revolution, and later to his time as president. Interactive consoles provide insight to this style of leadership and decision-making. By far the coolest thing that I've seen so far, of all these exhibits, is a 4D theater presentation of George Washington during the Revolution, as we see the Continental Army cross the wintry Delaware River on Christmas Eve, 1776. Internal snow generators kick in to produce snowflakes, and dry ice pump in cool fog-like conditions. Pretty cool. The museum covers it all, from the French-assisted victory at Yorktown, through Washington's reluctant acceptance of political office, becoming the nation's first president. All of this pales in comparison to Washington's truest gift to the new republic, his voluntary relinquishing of power. Washington was able to return to Mount Vernon after his presidency and died at his beloved estate on December 14, 1799. With some wheelchair assistance, you can visit his tomb in Mount Vernon, where he rests today next to his wife Martha. Like many historical figures, Washington was a man with flaws and a man of mark and importance. His home and memory are kept in good order. His estate does a fitting job at showing us a more relatable side to the mythos of a founding father. As we leave behind Mount Vernon and the 18th century, we travel to nearby Arlington, Virginia, near Rosslyn, to get a bird's eye view of Washington, D.C. This recently built sky view atop the CEB Tower building is a great place to get our bearings at the beginning of our tour to the nation's capital. You can pan around to see the Virginia suburbs that border the district and take in bits of historic trivia placed alongside the overlook, of which includes a hologram station of figures recounting their stories in the city, in this case, a suffragette.
Okay, so here we are on the observation deck here in Rosslyn, Virginia, overlooking the Potomac River and Washington, D.C. It is an unbelievable viewpoint that you need to make sure you can see. If you get up here to the 30th floor, you can take a look at the inside area, which we just did, and you get a great view of the airplanes coming in for Ronald Reagan Airport. You can actually see the tidal basin, Roosevelt Island, and the National Mall, which is wonderful. And on the backside, you'll see Virginia, Tyson's Corner, and Arlington, Virginia. But if you come up here to the 31st and 32nd floor observation deck outside, yes, it's hot, but it is really kind of cool. You feel like you're floating here, which is nice. You'll have someone that will escort you up here, up a ramp. It's wheelchair accessible. Once you get here, you can just spend your time taking a look at the city from an outdoor viewpoint, 32 floors up from the street level. Amazing.
Before we leave Northern Virginia, we will make a stop at the Uvar Hazy Air and Space Museum in Chantilly, Virginia. This is a bold statement, but there may not be a finer aviation museum in the world than the Air and Space Complex here in Chantilly, as well as its sister gallery inside the district. It is truly stunning. Wheelchair access is very good here, with elevators and long observation platforms and ramps all throughout the complex. You can take a flight simulator practicing your barrel rolls, or stroll along the world's most interesting machines of flight. History is around every corner of this museum.
So behind me here at the Uvar Hazy Air and Space Museum here in Chantilly, Virginia, is a Newport 28C. This is the same aircraft that was used by Eddie Rickenbacker. As you can see, the hat and the ring division emblem that's on the middle of the aircraft, giving you an idea about America's involvement in the Great War. As you progress, you can kind of get into the jet history and other aspects of World War II. The SR-71 Blackbirds downstairs, the retired actual space shuttle Discovery is actually there, which replaced the prototype Enterprise that was here for many, many years. Here in Chantilly in the Washington DC area, we got the Discovery. So we'll get a chance to take a look at that as we go through this wonderful museum.
Go for main engine start.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Mission liftoff of Space Shuttle Discovery, taking the space station to full power for full science.
Roger, roll, Discovery.
Discovery's roll maneuver is complete. It is now.
As a kid, there was nothing cooler than watching the space shuttle take off or land. My generation knew all the orbiters by heart: Enterprise, Columbia, Challenger, Atlantis, Endeavour, and of course, the Discovery. Once NASA's space shuttle program was discontinued in 2011, several museums around the nation were awarded a shuttle. The orbital shuttle OV-103 Discovery made her final home here in Chantilly, and the old girl is the star of the show. It is not uncommon for local retired NASA engineers or astronauts to donate their time to come in and talk about the shuttle program. Any other information you may need can also be found on a rented smartphone device with tons of space agency information. Get up close and look at the scarred heat shield tiles that protected this ship during re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. Discovery had a lot of wear and tear over her 27 years of service and nearly 40 missions, but that's truly what makes this exhibit so amazing. She is a real testament to the thousands of engineers, craftsmen, technicians, and flight teams that sent her up and brought her back home safely to Earth. From an inspiration of human achievement to the sacrifice of life through the horrors of war, the Air and Space Museum presents a wide spectrum of influential aircraft, including an American B29 and the payload that helped to end one of the more destructive wars in human history.
Of August 6th, Japanese time, the first atomic bomb hit an enemy target.
In a blink of an eye, the city of Hiroshima was destroyed by the first atomic bomb, nicknamed Little Boy. But it was a long road of secret development, planning, and execution, starting with the Manhattan Project and ending with the B-29, the Enola Gay, delivering her payload.
Now remember, it was August 6, 1945 that the Enola Gay and Paul Tibbets had dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Of course, that wasn't enough, and another bomb was dropped by Boxcar 3 days later on Nagasaki. But this plane has been fully intact, and it took over a decade and plus, once it arrived here in the mid-1980s, to be put back together again from cockpit on out. And it's on full display here, and these B29 Superfortresses are absolutely immense. The biggest propellered airplanes of its day. And one of the stories that I was always found very interesting was Paul Tibbets had once said that he had trained with his crew, his hand-picked crew, to do this operation, and they had to understand that when they dropped this payload that weighed so much that there would be a big lift in the aircraft that they had to take care of without having some problems. Once they did that, they had to make a complete 45-degree, I believe, turn to get away from the blast of the atomic bomb, or it would take the ship, and it would rattle almost every bolt almost out of the plane itself because of the concussion blast, which almost came true. So they did this training over and over again, and they actually glad that they did that because they were able to survive the blast itself. But it really is a piece of historic aviation history, and World War II history right behind us.
The work of Smithsonian archivists and engineers is really never done. In the Mary Baker Ingen hangar lies pieces of an overlooked workhorse of World War II. In a current restoration process, this B26 Marauder, known as Flakbait, awaits the painstaking efforts to piece her back together. Flakbait sustained over 1,000 bullet holes and numerous shrapnel fragments from anti-aircraft guns, yet she persevered through the Second World War and completed 207 missions over enemy territory. Perhaps after years of restoration, Flakbait may join these other aircraft in this Hall of Honor. We have done so much in Northern Virginia, and now it's time to explore DC, and the best way to do that is on the metro system. The National Mall is coming up, but first, here's a timely edition of Past Access Travel Tips. On this edition of Past Access Travel Tips, the DC Metro is our ride of choice when visiting the nation's capital, taking us from the suburbs to the National Mall in the district.
Metro is a great thing to be able to use. This system has been around for, since the early 80s, I believe, late 70s, early 80s. And we're actually on a train right now that looks like it's from that era. Yeah, look. So they have newer trains with a little bit more up-to-date technology on them. This is not one of those trains, but it is relatively pretty accessible, and you just do have to watch the lip getting onto the platform. Sometimes it's a little higher, sometimes it's a little lower. Do a wheelie, but be kind of aware that you don't want to fall to that gap. Usually you can get anywhere around the city on this metro through about 5 different colored lines. And the one we're taking today from Northern Virginia to the district is the Silver Line, new Silver Line from Reston, and we're going to go to Farragut West.
The Washington Metro system serves over 620,000 riders a day. That means full seats, lots of commuters, constant repair work on various lines, and wear and tear on needed elevators for wheelchair access. Even with those inconveniences, we have some tips to help you get the most out of traveling Metro. Before using Metro, it's best to check the web for repair messages and service availability for the disabled. Go to WMATA.com/service/accessibility. Next, if you can, avoid traveling at peak rush hour times in the morning and the evening. Wheelchair space on the trains are super difficult at these times. Plan your commute wisely with filling up your smart card pass at least to get you to your destination. You can refill it later at any given time. Also, use the Metro map to help figure out street level access that is suitable for wheelchairs. Some exits to the street level are escalator only, so look for the elevator exit options. And finally, if you have any questions, try talking to the Metro personnel on duty. They can help with Smart Pass card problems and other disability access questions. Have fun exploring the Washington, D.C. area. A quick ride to the Smithsonian Metro stop, and we are on our way to Constitution Avenue and one of my all-time favorite museums, the National Museum of American History. This place is jam-packed with priceless historic artifacts and cultural memorabilia. It is here that you can see Abraham Lincoln's hat on the night of his assassination, the ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz, a steel girder from the World Trade Center attacks, the salvaged 1776 gunboat Philadelphia, and a fan favorite of me and my son, the Batmobile from the 1989 movie Batman. In the main hall, the real star of the place is the authentic Star-Spangled Banner, no pun intended. It is here that tens of thousands of onlookers walk past a giant piece of fabric that means so much to this country. Once flown over Fort McHenry in Baltimore to defy the British attack in 1814, and inspire our national anthem, this American flag now battles the scourge of time. Thousands of man-hours were used to repair and restore the Star-Spangled Banner, now sealed behind climate-controlled and protective glass, preserved for generations to come. Historic artifacts come in all shapes and sizes here. and some represent an inspiring past of peaceful defiance to the status quo. 4 modest diner seats from a Woolworths in Greensboro, North Carolina, carry with them the story of 4 young college men driven to make a statement of civil disobedience that still resonates with the nation today. The lunch counter sit-ins in 1960 were meant to raise awareness of the old Jim Crow laws of segregation in the South. The exhibit offers testimonials of those that were there as you look into the mirror.
These are extremely important for our national character, our collective memory of history, and this is one of those important moments. Something as simple as 4 seats from a 5 and dime restaurant in the South, in Greensboro, North Carolina, that means so much.
Our tour continues across the mall to one of the most visited museums in the world, the Air and Space Museum on Independence Avenue. Oh, and by the way, wheelchair access is best from the mall side of the museum. Yes, I know, we already saw the sister Air and Space Museum a few miles away in Virginia, but this is the original, the OG of aircraft museums, if you will. Stroll through the main hall and look up at the historic passenger and military aircraft. Stop and take in the significance of the Apollo 11 capsule that came back from the 1969 moon landing. Lindbergh's first transatlantic flight with the Spirit of St. Louis. And the new exhibit of the original model of TV's Star Trek, USS Enterprise. The working lights and the warp drive nacelles power up to the delight of the inner nerd in all of us. Since we are on this side of the mall, it is an easy push a few blocks away to the National Museum of the American Indian. The brilliant hand-carved limestone gives a unique windswept impression, and vegetation near the outside pond represents the agricultural gifts from the Native Americans, known as the 3 sisters: corn, beans, and squash. Inside light fills the rotunda as artifacts are carefully displayed from many North American tribes. Artwork from a variety of regions and eras are presented to give insight into cultures pushed to the brink of extinction. Starry skies hang overhead of interactive displays retelling ancient folk tales and oral histories. The often bloody interactions with European settlers and traders tell the story of conflict, loss, and relocation. The striking image of the native peoples of North America serve as a reminder of what was lost through nation building and expansionism. I think what really resonates with me is the inevitable push and complicated relationship the native peoples would have with European settlers and later the American government. Diseases, battles, broken treaties, and relocations are all part of this difficult story. You can see treaties and agreements in native beaded form or in the white man's signed parchment. Nevertheless, much of these treaties would be broken, ignored, reworked, and forgotten for various reasons, thus leaving the tribes in question on the outside looking in. This museum does the rare thing by giving both sides of the argument on panels meant to give a fuller picture, a picture that unfortunately led to a figurative and literal trail of tears. As not to lose one's cultural identity, great efforts were made to record many various Amerindian languages, from Shoshone to Cheyenne. The 16,000 Shoshone words are preserved for future generations, as are other dialects and tribal languages. In many respects, the old ways of the indigenous peoples are lost to history. The voices of the past may seem to be forever silent. Still, many hold their histories close to their heart and fight for a nearly extinct way of life in hopes of preserving a cultural identity in the face of many modern-day obstacles. It is a cherished gift to their descendants and to all Americans that the American Indian spirit need not be scattered and lost to the winds of history. It is nearly 5 p.m. and the museums are closing for the day. So what's next? How about a little good old-fashioned American baseball? My son and I jump into a taxi and head off to South Capitol Street to Nationals Park, home of the Washington Nationals baseball team. This version of the Nationals is the third franchise the city has seen in over 100 years. This city loves their sports teams, and baseball is no exception. You may have to go back a ways since the then Washington Senators won the world title in 1924. But the tradition of loving the national pastime in the nation's capital has never wavered. Just look at the greats that played here. The big train, Walter Johnson. They said you wouldn't see his fastball, but you sure could hear it when it hit the glove. The great Goose Goslin from the World Series team in 1924. Mickey Vernon and his great glove work on first base. And the crushing home run swing of Harmon Killebrew. Who could forget him? As we enter the stadium, we see that all the history has spawned new traditions. Some fun, but pretty odd. Just like the presidential race in between the fourth inning. Who wouldn't like a hug from old G-Dubs? The crowds fill in for the pregame ceremonies. Just enough time to grab a chili dog before the national anthem. I have loved this time with my son. It is the same baseball tradition I had with my dad. This game has a strong sentimental connection for many Americans. Baseball is America's game. In a fast-paced 21st century world, coming out to the park to just chill out and watch the starting 9 guys play this game, well, it's a throwback to simpler times. As the sun sets, it is getting late in the game and it's getting late in the day. This has been an unbelievably great homecoming for me. And yet, we're still not done. Part 2 of our past access visit to Washington, DC and Baltimore rolls on. So here's a sneak peek at Part 2. Next time on Past Access, we conclude our trip to America and the nation's capital region, visiting some wheelchair-accessible historic homes, some famous and not so famous. And we head up I-95 to Baltimore for a history lesson on the Star-Spangled Banner and the national anthem.
So welcome to Baltimore and Fort McHenry here on the
We'll check out the USS Constellation and try our luck at cracking open a few Eastern Shore Maryland crabs. And if there's time, maybe one more baseball trip to one of America's most beautiful stadiums, Oriole Park at Camden Yards. Join us for Part 2 of American Pride, our past access visit to DC and Baltimore. We want to send a big thanks to all those who helped make this show possible, including the fine folks at our podcasting group.
We want to thank you for watching Past Access from Washington, D.C. We've seen so much on this trip to kind of give you a cross-section of what the city has to offer, from its diversity and its culture to its history, and something that I soon won't forget coming back to my hometown to share this with you. As we see the Capitol building behind me, I'd never gotten tired growing up as a kid, coming over the Potomac River and seeing the alabaster buildings, the Washington Monument, the Jefferson Memorial, and the Capitol building. I'm hoping that you got a little bit of the experience that I enjoyed here growing up in the Washington, D.C. area. And for wheelchair users, it's a very accessible city. So for Past Access, from Washington, D.C., I'm Pete Coleman. We're history.
You have been listening to Past Access with Pete Coleman. For more information on the show or insight to disabled access at historic locations, please visit us at pastaccess.com.